you wanted to, in part, continue this discussion on hypocrisy in different areas.
Well, I think I've come to figure out it's a big enough topic that I could probably hit on it every single show from now on.
And maybe we have.
Maybe we have. So the last time I was on, which was 8 weeks ago almost, right? Because I ended up skipping a rotation. We talked about hypocrisy. So hypocrisy is sort of saying one thing and doing another. And a person's actions really sort of show, I think, a person's true beliefs, right? Because they're really acting based on their true beliefs. And if they say, I believe such and such, and they're doing something else, whatever they're doing is probably a better indicator of what their real motives are, right? Because that's really where they're putting their energy. That's where their money is. That's where the money of their time. And if you're saying one thing and doing another, there's a deception going on. It could be a self-deception, or it could be an active deception where you're trying to deceive somebody else, and that's not good, right? And a lot of this kind of relates back to a Jefferson quote, Thomas Jefferson quote, that struck me when I first read it. He says, "Millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been burnt, tortured, fined, and imprisoned. Yet we have not advanced 1 inch towards uniformity." So he's talking about the fact that there's so much diversity of faith and different religious viewpoints. And then he says, "What has been the effect of coercion? To make one half of the world fools and the other half hypocrites." So his point is, with respect to these lies, either you believe them wholeheartedly and you're not critical, and so you're a fool, or you know that they're lies and you're a hypocrite and that you're promoting these sorts of things. So last time I talked about the hypocrisy of hospitals and funerals, abortion rights, the theological hypocrisy having to do with God giving us free will, right? If God gave us free will, why in the world are people trying to take that away by putting lots of restrictions on what people can do, other folks can do. Also, there's this Christians don't believe the do unto others thing of Jesus. They don't seem to buy into that whole thing, but that's a whole show topic to itself. So today I have a whole bunch of topics. I'd like to talk about House Resolution 8888, which is a pretty amazing piece of work. I think I can actually probably do the whole show on that. We can also talk about the war on Christmas, megachurch scams, the hypocrisy of lightning rods, just for fun. 10 Commandments is always waiting in the wings. There's lots of hypocrisy there. So why do religions need this deception? Well, because the religion is junk and they couldn't sell it otherwise, or they have to lie in order to sell these things. So that's my claim. And when religious leaders lie, it shows that they don't believe what they're selling. It shows that they are, promoting junk, and maybe it's there for their own benefit. Maybe they make money promoting this stuff. I don't know. And religion needs fools without a moral compass in order to thrive. So, I guess without further ado, I'll just jump into House Resolution 8888.
Sure.
This is a piece of legislation that is very early in the process. It's now just referred to committee. It was introduced in December 18th by Randy Forbes, who's a Republican from Virginia. And the title...
Sure it wasn't introduced by Dan Patrick? Oh, no, this is...
No, same this is cut from the guy's cut from the same cloth.
This is state...
okay, the title...
National.
Yeah, this is national. This is House Resolution 8888, affirming the rich spiritual and religious history of our nation's founding and subsequent history, and expressing support for designation of the first week in May as, quote, American Religious History Week for the appreciation of and education on America's history of religious faith. So that's the title of the thing.
So really they're trying to take the National Day of Prayer, which is in the first week of May,
right,
and make it the National Week.
Right. So give them an inch and they take a light year.
And it's really kind of, we every year the National Day of Prayer also coincides with the National Day of Reason, and that's not a coincidence. It's intelligent design. And we get together and we go down to the Capitol, and I noticed that this past year the number of people who showed up for the National Day of Prayer was
dwarfed,
paltry in comparison to years past. So I don't know what good extending this thing to an entire week is going to do. But
Well, I think that this is a lot of room for pandering at the national level. So this bill has 44 co-sponsors. So keep that in mind when I tell you how awful this thing is. That 44 plus the original sponsor signed on to this and thought it was a great idea. It's in committee, which means it may be abandoned. It's in the Committee of House Oversight and Government Reform, which fortunately has a good guy on it by the name of shoot, I can't remember his name. I'll remember it later. Anyway, we have a friend there who's a pro-science guy on that, who's been a real champion. Anyway, the bill, the structure.
Not Pete Stark.
I'm sorry.
Not Pete Stark.
No, it's
Oh, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
We'll keep on going.
Okay. The structure of the bill is it has 76 whereas clauses, right? They're little tidbit, whereas this, whereas that, whereas the other, and then four resolutions at the end. And the bulk of the whereas clauses are little supposed pearls of wisdom or whatever from or pearls of religious influence with regard to our history. That's what the bulk of those are. There's a whole lot of more recent stuff that the President X said why and these sorts of things. So, and supposedly it's free from particular religious favoritism, but if you read it, you'll find out pretty quickly it's based on a Christian fundamentalist overtones. And here are the problems with the bill. This is why you should care. It first off, it runs afoul of the separation of church and state. There's no reason at all for Congress to be making a bill like this. It's actually illegal. It's a violation of our Constitution. It's a violation of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law that is an establishment of religion.
Now, see, I'm not completely sure that I agree that this runs afoul of the First Amendment.
Okay.
I think it may.
That's my weakest argument.
I think it may. My big thing is why. I mean,
that's a good question.
We're
right.
in a war. We have economic issues. We have deep social issues. And you people who are paid to go up there as representatives of us, paid to do this work, are sitting around wasting time creating entire weeks of God worship.
Let's pat ourselves on the back.
Oh,
because we're
God
Christian.
is so good. I mean, the time you spent drafting this, passing it around, finding 44 other people to sign on, and oh, by the way, the process is just getting started. All of that is time wasted. That's what I mean. That's probably the most offensive thing.
That's the most offensive thing so far. There's also the problem that these whereas clauses completely ignore the negative influence of religion, like the apologetics of slavery and the persecution of Jews and blacks and gays and all sorts of other folks, other religious minorities.
Where's the bill that says, whereas Christianity was a principal tool in encouraging and supporting slavery for the first 150 years of this nation's history, we therefore declare a week free from this, abomination. But
the Salem witch trial is a very embarrassing episode about where religious influence in the United States that unfortunately isn't even mentioned in this thing.
So evidently, not only are people picking and choosing from the Bible, they're picking and choosing from history as well.
That's right. It's a lot of spin. And then the thing that's really, really annoying about it is it's loaded with lies about American history. It's from top to bottom. It's really loaded. And let me give you a quote from a guy named, just a second. This is from Mikey Weinstein of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. So he's kind of a serious patriot, and you don't want to cross his path. He said House Resolution 888 is perhaps the most disgraceful, shocking, and tragic example yet of the pernicious and persuasive pattern and practice of the unconstitutional rape of our bedrock American citizens' religious freedoms by the fundamentalist Christian right. He goes on to say, its myriad tortured and deliberate historical fictions fused by its congressional member drafters into a sorry screed of fascistic Christian exceptionalism and triumphantalism clearly enumerate its private sector and religious sponsors' unbridled lust to spare absolutely no effort to complete the transformation of our country into the United Christian States of America. So that's a pretty strong statement. So let's take a look at some of the things. It turns out one of the big heroes, unsung heroes in this whole episode is a woman by the name of Chris Rhoda, who wrote a book by the name titled "Liars for Jesus: The Religious Right's Alternative Version of American History." She's a historian who has, fortunately for America, pointed out all of the lies in this thing. And she's focused primarily on the ones having to do with U.S. history because that's her area of expertise. So one of the whereases clauses is, whereas political scientists have determined that the most frequently cited source in the political period was known as the founding era was the Bible. Okay, so this is one of the whereas clauses, and this is false. Okay,
But even if it were true.
right? There's a lot of these is like, so what? So what? It's
Not
a
only is it a
laundry
so
list of-
what, but okay, and once upon a time the most frequently cited source was the Code of Hammurabi. I mean, when you've got a book that's as pervasive and ubiquitous as the Bible, of course it's going to be cited. When your population is 95, 96% Christian, as was the case in those times, of course they're going to cite it. That says nothing about whether it's right or whether they should be doing it.
Right. But this whole thing gives you a little insight into how the minds work behind this, okay? So there's this little phrase in there, and you might think, oh, well, that might be true. There might be true. There might be a lot of biblical references that time. But when you dig deeper, you find out that a lot of this is based on a legitimate study by a guy named Donald Lutz that has been misquoted, and it's being used by the National Council on Bible Curriculum and in public schools to spin doctor the thing. And they're making a claim that 94% of the period's documents were based on the Bible. Well, where does that come from? Well, it turns out that 34% of the documents that refer to the Bible, you find out when you dig around, are sermons. So there's a whole bunch of sermons that are sort of skewing this thing, and then it turns out that where does the other 60% come from? Well, David Barton just kind of pulled that out of his ass. David Barton is a historian, is a pseudo historian that makes up a lot of BS about American history for consumption by the conservative
Isn't he
Christians.
part of the Wall Builders group?
His group is called the Wall Builders, which is also deceptively named. And so here it says, Barton somehow concluded from his own study that 60% of the documents in the period were based on the Bible, and this added that to the 34% of the skewed sample from the Lutz thing, and that they end up with 94%. So that's where they come from. And it turns out, well, if you really study this, there's not a single reference at all to the Federalists' writings, which are the ones of the people who founded our country, because they were real big on the Enlightenment.
Right.
So here we have a lie that goes miles, and when the truth takes a little while to get out of bed. So here's another one. So that's one lie out of many. I can go on and on about this, but let's just hit a few, just so you can get a flavor for how insane this thing is. Here's another one. Whereas throughout the American founding, Congress frequently appropriated money for missionaries and for religious instruction, a practice that Congress repeated for decades after the passage of the Constitution and First Amendment. According to Chris Rhoda, this never happened at all. This is completely false. It's completely made up. So there's a lovely one. Whereas 4 days after approving the Declaration, the Liberty Bell was rung. It's like, who cares, right? Apparently the Liberty Bell wasn't even anywhere near when this happened. It was actually out of commission. So, false. Whereas upon approving the Declaration of Independence, John Adams declared that the 4th of July, quote, ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty, end quote. Well, this turns out to be a spin on a real quote that John Adams said. Here's his real quote. The 2nd day of July, which was basically the Independence Day as far as he was concerned, of July 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from the end of this continent from this time forevermore. So it's a very, very lovely little quote, but what they've done is they've taken this ought to be important, this ought to be a big deal, into that that John Adams said that the celebration should be this way, right? So he completely changed the spin or the meaning of this quote. So I can go on and on. This Chris Rhoda has done a great job of debunking the whole thing. So it's basically a whole bunch of lies, all right? Now, so what does this say? What does this set of lies say about the sponsors? I mean, we can learn so much from this bill about the Christian character and the character of our sponsors. It basically says the sponsors of the bill are intentionally deceptive to Americans, or they're ignorant. And either way, these people have demonstrated they are unfit for office, in my opinion. They are trying to propagate a whole bunch of propaganda under the name of U.S. law, and these people don't deserve to be in office. Okay, so, and furthermore, they're sabotaging the U.S. history, which shows that they don't have our country's best interests at heart. They have other agendas. Okay, these folks are not patriotic. They're treasonous. Okay, they have no respect for the laws. They have no respect for our history, and they are not serving their constituents, but they are marching to different orders. So there's a clear conflict of interest here. These people are not don't deserve to be paid even by the United States, right? They're not even working for the United States. They're working for the Christian conservatives. Okay, so when you have this conflict of interest, you have many deeply religious people are unfit for office because they will gladly make this sort of trade. They'll gladly use their power to promote Christianity, even though they've been put in office to do a particular thing. And this example, Matt, with Chris Comer is a fine example. We have, right. You were saying that we had 7 of the board members just pro-creationist, right? And you don't; those people are not going to act in the best interests of education. They're there for a political coup, and so these people don't deserve to be in office.
And evidently, since the Democrats in Texas don't give a damn about the school board and are only concerned with legislative issues, they're not even running anybody in opposition in where you've got a pro-science member of the school board who's a conservative Republican, and they're running another conservative Republican against that person who's a creationist. And of course, that's the person with all the money.
Yeah. So
we're probably going to see a swing in the State Board of Education to where we have an 8-7 majority of creationists, just about the time that it comes to, that we're reviewing the science criteria. It really is, and that dire.
They're not going to give it a fair shake. That's pretty clear, right? So this is throughout. I mean, this is in school boards. This is throughout our government. We have people that are doing this sort of thing. So another problem that Matt brought up earlier: what is the benefit to America of these sorts of resolutions? In fact, I didn't even read what the resolutions are. Let me read them, just so that we can get an idea of what they're trying to do here. That's important. Where is it? I got so many papers here. I thought I had it right on top.
Well, the Congress has done a number of resolutions and different things that are pretty much meaningless. And I every time I see one of them, I kind of shudder because I realize, okay, this is some congressman that's doing a buddy a favor. You know, we're going to show respect for this particular portion of our society or our history by declaring, something pointless.
Right, and they often do like platitudes, right? We rahrah for mom and apple pie, that sort of thing. Feels good sorts of things.
And in general, that's why I'm not quite sure that, and I haven't read all the resolutions, so I'm not sure, but I'm not quite sure this really runs afoul of the First Amendment, because it could just be let's put together a big rahrah, religion thing, and this week isn't a mandate for anybody to do anything. The idea that we're going to set aside a week to celebrate our religious history. I don't know why that gets a whole week when some other serious individuals only get a day. Of course, then you've got in Black History Month. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it varies as to how much attention we're going to pay to something. On that level, I don't really mind it so much. What I do object to is the thing that I talked about earlier, where they're wasting time and money on things that are far less important than the real issues. And the things that you've pointed out, where they're essentially engaging in this kind of revisionist history and lying. And I can't count the number of times that people bring up the Founding Fathers and the Founding Fathers were Christian.
Yeah,
well, yes, in fact, many of them were, but many of them were also deists, many of them were also freethinkers. They weren't necessarily of one mind on religion. And many times God was attempted, there was an attempt to insert God into the Constitution, and every time it was explicitly voted down. These were men who understood that true religious freedom has to serve everyone of all beliefs, that we can't even insert language that encourages religion over irreligion. That's just not the case. I mean, you can't function as well. As soon as you start taking sides, not necessarily, we're Catholic and not Protestant, or we're Jewish and not Christian. You can't even do the we're religious and not religious. This has to be a country where everybody is free to have their own beliefs, and not to have the morals and ethics of a majority imposed upon them by fiat or legislation. I mean, you can't work that way. But when they pick out the quotes from the Founding Fathers, they're really selective. Everybody tends to ignore the fact that Thomas Jefferson essentially created the Jefferson Bible, which is a redacted New Testament, removing everything supernatural and just basically keeping some of
considered Jesus a philosopher.
Yeah, he kept some, not all, of the moral and ethical teachings of Jesus. And you know what? I could do the same thing. There are some of Jesus's moral and ethical statements that I'm, just fine with. There are others that I think are horribly bad advice. This whole take no thought for tomorrow, God's going to provide everything you need. Don't save, that's absurd. That's bad advice. And, fortunately, I guess, we don't see too many Christians following that bad advice because I think they recognize it. But, you've got James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Paine, George Washington, all these guys that they quote, but they pick and choose. Well, I can pick and choose quotes as well. James Madison, for example, starts off, "The purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe in blood for centuries." John Adams, who they were just referencing in there. "God is an essence that we know nothing of. Until this awful blasphemy is got rid of, there will never be any liberal science in this world. Can a free government possibly exist with the Roman Catholic Church? The question before the human race is whether the God of nature shall govern the world by his own laws or whether priests and kings shall rule it by fictitious miracles. The divinity of Jesus is made a convenient cover for absurdity. Nowhere in the Gospels do we find a precept for creeds, confessions, oaths, doctrines, and whole cartloads of other foolish trumpery that we find in Christianity." Now, this is John Adams talking. Mm-hmm. Thomas Jefferson, "It's too late in the day for men of sincerity to pretend they believe in the Platonic mysticisms that three are one and one is three, and yet that one is not three, and that three are not one. But this constitutes the craft, the power, and the profit of the priests." I mean, and I've got probably 20 pages full of different quotes here from him.
And these were educated men, and they could tear it down.
The thing that, and I've brought this up before, the thing that I don't think enough people really understand is it doesn't matter whether or not the Founding Fathers were pro-religion or anti-religion, whether they were Christian, non-Christian, whether they were atheists, theists. Who cares? They founded a nation. They founded it on specific principles. But we're not bound by that. If, and we've demonstrated this before, slavery used to be legal. We have graduated to the point where we understand that this was an abomination. This is a terribly dark period in our history where we were so woefully misguided with regard to morals and ethics and how we treat other people that we allowed something, excuse me, that should have never been allowed. But it's a natural part of the progress of our growth. Ethics and morals evolve. We changed that. It doesn't matter to me so much what the Founding Fathers thought. What matters to me is what we think now. What kind of changes can we make now? And, while I attack religious ideas that I find absurd, I fully realize that we all have to work together. We are stuck here in this little country, on this little planet, where we need to figure out a way to best work together for the benefit of everybody. And any attacks on religion I make are because I feel that those religious claims directly impede progress. They represent an old, unwarranted style of thinking that has done nothing, I won't say has done nothing, but that has impeded progress, retarded scientific progress, and moral progress. And that's where the attacks come from. I'm choked.
Yeah.
I think I swallowed something.
Okay. Well, let me read the resolutions of this bill. They seem a little innocuous, perhaps, but there are 4 of them. Resolved that the United States House of Representatives, 1, affirm the rich spiritual and diverse religious history of our nation's founding and subsequent history, including up to the current day. So I don't have a serious problem with that.
No, and as long as you're going to affirm the diverse religious history, let's go ahead and add some whereases, including some of the quotes I read.
Sure.
As long as this
contributions of minority religions, right? Let's
or the lack of religion. Let's get some quotes in from Thomas Paine, of course, was a deist, but let's get some quotes in there that address the significant contributions that atheists and freethinkers have made to this country.
Sure.
As long as we're talking about religious diversity, let's not narrow it to just religion.
Sounds good. 2, the House of Representatives recognizes that the religious foundations of faith on which America are built are critical underpinnings of our nation's most valuable institutions, and from the inescapable foundation for America's representative processes, legal systems, and societal structures.
Hogwash.
Bullshit.
Complete and utter BS. You might as well have just said, let's just go ahead and have the United States acknowledge that our laws are based on the 10 Commandments,
right.
Which, by the way, is not true in any sense.
Did I mention this is trying to tear down church-state separation? 3, rejects in the strongest possible terms any effort to remove, obscure, or purposefully omit such history from our nation's public buildings and educational resources. So I think this is the sort of heart of the thing, where they basically want to put this revisionist history in our educational resources and use the government as a propaganda machine for their religion, which I don't think is a good idea.
Well, this thing essentially allows them to put up religious displays.
Yes. Yeah.
It says, that any effort to remove, obscure, or purposely omit such history, and they're talking about the religious history, from public display in buildings.
Right. So
this is an end around.
It's an end around around the First Amendment.
It sets up really a false dichotomy. It's going on the presumption that preventing them from putting up religious displays in public on public ground is an affront to the religious history of the nation, or to their religion as they practice it now, both of which are completely untrue. But the real thing is that we're trying to establish a society where the religious and the non-religious are equally free, where when you're walking into the courtroom, you don't have to have this huge Bible display and 10 Commandments display and go in under the impression that you are some kind of second-class citizen. You don't need to paper the walls of every public building with a tribute to a religious history. And by the way, what's your motivation for doing so? Are you really trying to cherish history? Well, start a history museum. In reality, what you're trying to do is promote your religious beliefs, and you're using the fact that your religious beliefs have a history, and I'm not so convinced that they're the critical history that you try to establish.
Yeah, ringing the liberty bell was just super important religiously, right?
Yeah, I think Jesus did that. Jesus showed up in Philly and rang that bell and he hit it so hard it cracked. Isn't that what happened?
Something like that.
power
I do
of
have
God.
some articles about bell ringers getting electrocuted because they didn't have lightning rods, but we can get to that later.
Nice. I wonder if that's why they invented the rope where you stand out the bottom to ring it instead of running up the
That
wacky.
rope dry, yeah. Well, why don't we, I tell you what, why don't we pause? Oh, look, the fourth one.
Yeah.
Expresses support for the designation of America Religious History Week every year for the appreciation and education of America's history of religious faith. So that's the kind of token thing.
Yeah, we're
The
gonna.
meaty thing is the end around the First Amendment. Why don't we pause, take some calls, and I'll come back and we can talk about what this resolution says about Christianity.
Yeah, the third resolution in there is the one where I think they've completely tried to run afoul of the First Amendment.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
they're basically, when you say that you're going to not allow people to challenge religious displays on public grounds, now you have imposed upon their rights and their freedoms. Whether or not a court ends up agreeing with, and I had a discussion with somebody recently where they were basically claiming that they could make their case in court and a jury would agree with them. And I was like, so what? Juries let OJ go. That doesn't, and I'm not necessarily, saying he is guilty, although I think he was. What a jury decides or what a court decides has no relevance to whether or not something is true or right. People are human; they make mistakes. You can make a convincing argument. One of the things, the lawyer who looks best and sounds best is the one who may win in some instances. It's not about whether or not you can make your case and get people to agree with you. I mean, we could find a court where a jury is going to agree wholeheartedly and unanimously that God exists. That doesn't tell us anything at all about whether or not a God exists. Or any of the
Look at all the
characteristics.
death penalty convictions that are being overturned, right? That's a great example of juries make mistakes.
Yeah. But even if they didn't make mistakes, we have no way of telling whether or not they're correct. This is just their assessment. I have no doubt you could convince 12 people of almost anything, especially 12 people who were unable to get out of jury duty. That's a joke.
Well, to be
That's
fair,
a joke.
yeah.
I like jury duty. I do consider it an obligation. I look forward to doing it, but it's an old joke.
I was going to say, in defense of juries and the court process, it is an opportunity for both sides to present their case to disinterested parties and hopefully, get at the meat of the matter. And it does work most of the time.
Well, let's go ahead and we'll take some calls real quick. As a reminder, we are live. It's Sunday, January 27, 2008. We've got about 45 minutes or so left in the program. The number's up on your screen if you're watching live, and perhaps it's even up on your screen if you're not watching live. After the program's over, everybody involved in the show gets together and goes to El Arroyo on 5th Street for dinner. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us. We'll get there around, the show's over at 4:30. We'll get there at 5 o'clock and stay till maybe 7-ish. You don't have to be a member to attend this or any of the other events, but